I think we've waited long enough for the laggards. We'll go ahead and reward the people that got here early. My name is Jeff Danford, and I am an engineer with Scripps. I'm with our Innovations Development Group, and I lead our FHIR innovation projects. And today we're going to talk a little bit about one of the projects that we've been working on now for the last few years, revolving around care planning. Before I get started with this, I want to give you some context for this project, let you know where it came from and what our thought processes were around it. This is a project that we started working on a few years ago. It's grown out of something called Clinicians on FHIR, which is, for those of you that go to the HL7 meetings, the last day of the FHIR working group, or excuse me, the HL7 working group meetings, they have something called Clinicians on FHIR, where clinicians have a chance to exercise some of the things that the technicians have put together to make sure that where we're going technologically with the FHIR standard also makes sense from a clinical workflow. Now, I am not a clinician by any definition of the term, but I'm allowed to go to the Clinicians on FHIR meeting as long as I promise to keep quiet and not draw attention to myself. And so we have a chance to talk through some of the things that we've been doing. Now, with most projects, you always have to start with what is the problem you're trying to solve. And the problem that we've been looking at really is something that in looking at care planning in general, what we've seen is that FHIR has done an excellent job at defining very straightforward concepts. We now have a really good understanding of what an allergy or a problem is. But the more complex things, like care planning, like really taking care and monitoring a patient's care, there hasn't been a whole lot done on that. And so one of the Clinicians on FHIR projects has been around care guides and care planning. And these are the areas, oh, that's interesting. Always fun. Let me see if I can turn that off real quick. Bear with me 1 minute. There. Let's try that again. So things we've been seeing is that the clinicians have brought to us and they've said that patients are having more and more interesting problems. They have more problems, they have chronic problems, things that are just going to have to be managed and maintained for a long period of time. And at the same time, clinicians are wanting to know how to include care guides, evidence-based medicine into the care that they're doing. And so that was what we were looking with the project. We were also looking around the scope of some use cases, specifically transitions of care. As an example, when a patient is discharged from an acute going into a post-acute situation, or for managing ongoing care, such as like when you go into an assisted living, or you've got to worry about home health services. And the last thing that we wanted to address were questions that were being asked to us by clinicians. Things like, what order sets need to be used? How do we know what protocol we need to be conforming to? What are the guidelines? How do we know that what we're offering is absolutely the best evidence-based medicine that we can be practicing today? So these were the concepts that we used to start our project. And the first thing we were looking at is that we have care guides. I mean, this is not something that we have never done before. Scripps, like many companies, has been producing care guides for a long time. They're very well researched, they're very detailed, but unfortunately, at the end of the day, they are still a piece of paper. And somebody has to take that piece of paper, read it, ingest it, and then put it into the system when they're placing the orders. And that leads to gaps, that leads to misses, and especially with the way people are practicing these days, having the time to go through these things is not really a good practice. So when we're sitting there looking at these care guides and we're looking at the care plan resource, trying to figure out how we could do things, in one of these sessions about 2 years ago, Lloyd McKenzie looked at us and he said, well, we do have these things called plan definitions and activity definitions. And we were very suave. We went, huh? And asked them, what exactly does that mean? And we quickly looked those things up. And we saw that FHIR had already put together something that would allow us to make care plans computable, both with plan definition and something called activity definition. Now, plan definition allows us to put together essentially a template for a FHIR care plan. It allows us to list out all the things that you would find on a care guide, who published it, when it was published, when it was last reviewed, what jurisdictions does it apply to, what is it meant to treat, as well as giving you a list of what are the recommended actions for taking care of the patient. And those actions are defined using the activity definition. And the activity definition is a computational representation of an order. It's basically a way that you can create a template that has everything built into it that you need. For medications, it has the dosage, it has the strength, it has the sig ready to go. It lets you know everything you need to know. And we can put all these things together as a template. So the first thing we did when we started working with this is we wanted to make sure that from the template structure, it would match up with everything that we were doing. So we sat down and started with a very simple example, well, relatively simple, but definitely common, diabetes. And we looked at the care guides for diabetes. And if you look at these, you'll see that there are not just one medication, but it's a list of possible medications. And it can be the front line, it can be alternatives. It has the list of all the potential orders that are recommended as best practices. But in general, this is more of a Chinese menu type of situation where nobody is ever expected to order everything off of these. What they're supposed to do is read through it, decide which ones make the most sense for their patients. So when we did this, the first thing we did was to see if we could turn these into a resource. And we actually had a lot of success with that. That was fairly straightforward. We were able to put together a plan definition for diabetes. And within that, we had lists of actions, and we defined them up, and you can actually group them together. So you can put them into a hierarchy. You can say, perform this action before you perform the next action. You perform this action if this first action isn't performed, and you can group them together so that they're done at the same time. So you really do get the context out of this. And we had a lot of success getting all those pieces and everything put together. Now, the next thing we want to look at is a feature that is supported by both plan definition and activity definition called the apply operation. And the apply operation does exactly what it sounds like it does. It takes the plan definition or the activity definition that you've come up with, and it turns it into the appropriate FHIR resource. So a plan definition, you can apply it and create a care plan. For an activity definition, you can create a resource request. Something like a medication request, a service request, a supply request, a referral request. So that was something that we thought was exactly what we needed for this project. Now, the next thing that we found when we looked at these resources is they have something called dynamic values. And dynamic values got very interesting because the way dynamic values are structured is it allows us to put together a formal expression using either FHIR or clinical query language, CQL, to indicate exactly what are the conditions and the context that the plan or the activity should be executed. You can put in things as simple as these are activities that should only be performed by gender. So we have everything that's listed that if you're male, have a male patient, don't perform this. But you can also look at things like if the patient has certain values on their lab results. This is something that should be performed. So it allows us to really give a lot of guidance to the individual providers when they're choosing their orders. It's not just that laundry list anymore, but they're actually something that relates back to the patient. And these are things we can run against the patient's record. The expressions can be either inline so that they are specific to a particular care plan or activity definition or plan definition, or they can be also included in a library. So you can put all of these statements into one collection and then have them referenced. So you can have standard definitions that are used everywhere. So we looked at all these pieces, we started playing with them, and we realized we really have something that is almost exactly what we need, but it wasn't quite everything. And there were two things that were really missing for us when we went to this. The first was that the apply operation was an instance level operation. Basically what it meant is that when you had this operation that you wanted to use, it had to exist in the system. You could send a message to a server and say, I want you to apply plan definition 1, 2, 3. But you couldn't really give it any feedback about that definition, other than to say, do something with it. The other problem that we were looking at is that the search parameters for both plan definition and activity definition, but particularly plan definition, were very limited. They were things that were very much in the scope of an individual plan definition, and they didn't allow us to do even simple things like give me plan templates for treating diabetes, or give me plan definitions that would be used for a referral of care. So these were things that we took back to HL7. We told them that these are things that we needed. And in R4, they made 2 changes for us. The first was they gave us a resource level apply. So now, rather than saying apply this particular resource that is already stored on your system, we could say we want you to turn a plan definition into a care plan, and we'll pass that into you as a reference. So you don't have to have it stored in the system. I will give it to you, and all you have to do is turn it into a care plan. And we can do the same thing with the activity definitions. So now you can create the medication that I tell you to do, not something that you have to have already stored in your system. The other thing that they gave us was searching by context. There is an element in the plan definition called use context, or excuse me, context. It is a usage context data type, and it allows us to define a code system and also what we're looking for. So we can pass in a SNOMED code for a diabetes, or we can pass in an ICD-10 for chronic kidney disease, or really whatever kind of coding system we want that we think is going to be applicable to the plan definition. So those 2 pieces really got us going with our project. And what it's gotten us to now is we have something that we call patient-centered evidence-based care planning. And what this allows us to do is we can start with the patient's problem list. And in this example, we're saying diabetes. Patient has been diagnosed with diabetes, and now it's time to create a care plan for taking care of them. So the first thing that the system can do is it can reference a library of templates, and it can say, from this library, give me every plan definition that you have in the system that is for the treatment of diabetes. And it can be one library, it can be many libraries. However many usage systems you want to, or knowledge systems you want to tie into, you can pull these things in. When you get this plan definition, it's a template. It has all the medications, all the lab orders, all of the other pieces of potential treatment of care that you can choose from. And at that point, what the user can do is they can pick from those and customize a plan definition specific to that patient for that particular problem. And we can also build in logic around this using the CQL and some of our other business logic to recommend to the user whether or not the order that they're choosing is actually appropriate. We can do things like when they choose a particular medication, we can look at or reference the patient's medication list and give them back a adverse reaction warning, so that they will not put that medication on their list. We can look at their existing lab orders and their existing lab results. And if there was a lab that was performed within the last month, we can give the clinician a notification that this particular lab doesn't need to be performed again because we still have current results. So we can guide them. At no point, though, are we enforcing any of this. Clinicians are still free to choose whatever orders they want to put together for this particular patient. All we're trying to do is provide everybody a common starting point so that when they go in, they have a list of medications, a list of labs, a list of every kind of order that is recommended for the treatment based on the latest evidence. Now, when they create this custom plan definition, it's something that they don't actually have to save into their system, but they may choose to. It may be that they've created a plan definition template that is going to fit their practice based on one that they got from the library. They can save this to their system, but there is a reference that we can store in that plan definition on their system that references back where the original one came from. There's an element in plan definition called URL, which indicates the initial location or the canonical location of that resource. So whenever they have that template put into their system, they can use it, but we can also reference back to the original plan definition, and if it has been updated, if it's been modified, there's a new version, we can let the user know that the template that you're using there's a new version, and they can pull that into their system, or they can continue to use the one that they've got. But ultimately, when they have these plan definitions, they can then post those to the EHR system or the ordering system that they want, and with an apply operation that is going to create the care plan for that patient and will also at the same time create all of the orders that are necessary. So we pass in an activity definition for metformin. It will create a medication request with the strength, with the dosage, with the SIG, everything all ready to go. It can also pass in procedures that we want to perform. And this allows us also to tie these activity events back into the health concerns and the health goals that the patient may have. So we thought it would, this whole system, it was allowing us to really help people make the consistent decisions and try to make sure that everybody was doing everything at least from the same starting point. Now, this is the proof of concept that we've been working with out of this project. This is an overnight success, 2 years in the making. It's something that we've put together. We're calling it All Scripps Care Manager. And you can tell that it is still very much a work in progress because the marketing people haven't gotten to it and put all the nice colors and graphics into it. But essentially what this is a Smart on FHIR application that we've built out that when it is launched from within the EHR, it will query the patient and get their problem list, display the list of active problems that the patient currently has. The user can pick the problem that they want to develop a care plan for. Once the problem is picked, we will query our knowledge library, pull in all the templates that are associated with that particular problem. They can edit their list and then apply it back into the system. Now, one wrinkle that we've added into this tool is we recognize that not every system will support the apply operation. So we will also have the capability to generate all of the orders and the care plan for them and then save them back to the database with a post. But if they do support the apply operation, we will just send the plan definition and activity definition edited resources in, and then the EHR will have the ability to apply any business logic that they want to do. For example, if we send in a medication request, this may be something that is going to go to someone else to be signed off. A task can be added to the physician's list to sign off on the prescription before it's sent out. Or if an order is going to be placed, it can go to the appropriate lab to be executed. So, excuse me, we still have several steps to go. And we've got lots of work to do, and Dave Carlson, who's been leading this with FHIR for a while now, has these on his roadmap, and we're going to keep him busy for quite some time. The first piece we have to do is we have to finish the proof of concept project that we've been working on, getting it all ready to go so that we have something that we can then put out to the world and let everybody see and play with. We also want to do this through some continued Connectathon testing. We want to make sure that we've got everything addressed. There's still several questions that we have unanswered about exactly how all this functionality is going to go and whether it's going to be accepted by all the clinicians that we're going to give it to. But one of the things that's really interesting that we want to do is we think we're to the point where we can start to integrate the care team management so that not only are you choosing what the order sets are for the patient, but you're also able to assign the care team to the patient from the same Smart on FHIR application. And we can look them up from directories, we can match them up by the roles that they need to fulfill on the care team, and we can send out invitations to those members and bring them into the care team when they accept. What we also can do at that point is we can register them for subscriptions so that as the record for the patient changes and things are added to the care plan, all members of the care team will receive notification. So we will have a truly distributed system. Everybody has access to it at the level and within the scope of their role within the team. And the last but not least, the dynamic values. We've done the research on that. We've done some initial work on that. And by we, I'm being very generous and including myself in that group. But we do want to work through all the possibilities for that and see if we can develop some very I don't want to say intricate, but I want to say we want to have some very inclusive rules and make sure that we are really considering exactly how we want these order sets to be performed so we can give the users the best experience we can as well as the best guidance. And that is all I have. So, anybody have any questions or anything that they'd like? Yes?
I have a two-part question.
Sure.
Does the care plan FHIR actually takes into account the goals and tracking the goals?
Yes.
The second part is how about the barriers?
The
Barriers.
I'm not from
Barriers.
barriers. Such as I'm not sure what you're referencing.
For example, in case of complex care,
Mm-hmm.
you have multiple conditions with given patient. There are situations where the patient may say that I don't want to track to this particular goal, or I don't want care management for this particular intervention.
Sure. So I understand what you're saying now. Thank you. So to answer the first part of your question, as far as goals and the health concerns, those are things that can be included in the plan definition itself. So we can, there are fields that they can come pre-populated, or you can add them in so that during the apply operation they're also included in the care plan. And then we can say what activity is, with the activities that are included in that list, which goal that they're intended to apply to. Now, as far as things like patient preferences and other things, another thing that we've been looking at specifically are things like, getting back to the original problem, patients have multiple chronic conditions that we're trying to maintain. We're not going to have a patient that just has diabetes. We're going to have a patient that has diabetes and has chronic kidney disease, and they also suffer from depression. And what we're going to have to do is put together a system that when we're adding these, creating these care plans for each one, each treatment of each problem, that it references the other care plans as well, so that we know what the patient's medication list is from this care plan as well as the one that we're trying to create at this point in time. And then ultimately, we have to include things like the consent resource to support the patient's preferences.
Okay. Thank you very much. If I may ask just one more question.
Sure.
When it comes to including the evidence-based clinical content, I'm actually from a payer's, talking from a payer's perspective. When the care plans are built, more than likely that we work with a third-party company that provides an evidence-based clinical content. Is there a provision to include such a content from an outside entity into the care plan?
Yes, absolutely. That's the whole point behind the library, that we're trying to create, that the end user can choose what content they want to provide. All we're doing is we're having it presented in a common template form.
Thank you.
Sure.
Jeff, let me tack on to that. I'm Dave Carlson. We worked with Jeff on this for almost 3 years now. So there was a presentation this morning by Maria Michaels from CDC talking about a project that we're also involved in. There's a new HL7 implementation guide called Clinical Practice Guidelines on FHIR, or CPG on FHIR. And I think it gets at very much the last question you just asked. We're looking at defining the process for creating computable, interoperable definitions of the practice guidelines, including the clinical decision support within that. But it gets at that question you're asking, where we're very interested in be able to share practice guidelines from professional societies, and also from specific within practice, communities of practice and organizations, so that it would allow you within, let's say, one healthcare provider has particular expertise in cancer treatment. They've created some of their own practice guideline protocols based upon their own expertise. We really want to enable those to be shared with the other providers involved in coordinating the care across organizations, so they can get reference directly back to the same evidence-based practice guidelines in a shareable way, and pooling those so that any other members in that care coordination team across multiple organizations can share in back in that references and work truly as a team back to the evidence-based. And there's actually another project underway right now through AHRQ. It's called the ACTS. There's actually a project trying to create proof of concept also at evidence-based care, and it gets at some of those same questions. So might look at that too. But yep.
A technical question. How do you handle versioning of the care plan? So there are two aspects. One is if the care plan or the template changes, or if the patient condition changes, so you actually have to drop the one plan and then replace it with another plan. So there are a number of technical issues that can arise with the whole network of resources that you have to handle there.
Sure. So everything that we're importing and applying is based off of the plan definition resource. And the plan definition resource, everything that we generate is coming from ultimately, there's a source of truth, a content provider. And when the plan definition is updated, the dates on it change. And I'm not talking about just last updated, I'm talking about last review date, last publication date, version numbers, things like that. And when we create the patient-centered template, from that, we store the based on for that particular template, and it points back to that original version. So that every time that version is opened up, we can check back with the library and make sure that we are still running the latest and greatest version. If there is an updated version, we will give the user a notification that there is updated content for that. Now, we include all of the activity definitions as part of the whole of the plan definition, so that we're not checking the individual updates for that. We're assuming that if an order is going to be updated as part of the plan definition, the entire plan definition revision is going to go up. So we only have to check the one. Now, as far as the patient itself, plan definitions, they have a period of activity that they have a start and stop date for them. And we are actually envisioning a patient can have multiple plan definitions that are nested together. So you could have one plan definition that conceivably represents the entire patient's longitudinal record, from the day that I start seeing them until the day they are no longer my patient. But within that, we can have individual conditions that will come up, like chickenpox. We'll start a care plan for treatment of that, and then when that is over, we're done, and it's closed off. It's still referenced from that master care plan, but it is no longer active at that point. And same thing, if we find that we have a care that is no longer necessary, or it's something we've determined is no longer relevant, we have the ability to turn it off, mark it as inactive, and put a closing date on it.
I wanted to pinpoint on if you have a running activities and then the plan gets changed. So what about the running instances of the old plan? Are you updating them or relying on user interaction? How would you approach this? So for some reason, if the old care plan is considered not valid anymore, and you have a new version that should replace it, but you're in the middle of the implementation of it.
Yes. So that's definitely one of the next steps, pieces that we need to address. It's quite honestly, it's a care or a use case that I haven't considered. In my mind, anything that is still active on that care plan means that the care plan itself still needs to be active. Just because it was something, the evidence is that we have given them, prescribed this medication for the treatment of this condition. So now if we decide that medication needs to be moved over to another care plan, it can be transitioned over, but that original one is still linked to that care plan. But what's happened is we have to make sure that because the patient's condition has changed or their circumstances have changed, that we reflect that accurately in the care plan as we go forward.
So, Jeff, you're starting to talk about the longitudinal nature of these care plans. Can you speak to how automated the ongoing maintenance of the plan is versus is it, each clinician has to check in and make sure that they're doing that next task? You know what I'm asking?
Yes, and that is getting into, you've uncovered my secret evil plan. What we're ending up with is we are trying to, this is something that we spent a lot of time talking about, trying to figure out exactly how we're going to represent this, because care plans for patients are not simple. They are very involved, they're very complex, there are a lot of people that are involved in them and a lot of moving parts. What we're trying to do for the automation piece is when we create a care plan, even for something as simple as we're going to treat their cold, we want to have all the members of the care team, both the clinical and the caregivers. So we want to definitely make sure that every member of the care team for that particular patient is represented. They all have access to the record at their role and at their scope. So, and we want to have anybody who is doing other treatments for that patient. With other care plans, with other care teams. So maybe they don't know all of the aspects of the treatment for that other condition, but they at least have access to their medication list. They have access to their lab orders and the results from those lab orders. So we don't have to be duplicating and triplicating everything. But this is still very much the work in progress. We've started with the very simplest of use cases, and we've already found so many questions that we want to work through that we're going to be busy for quite some time.
One more question, anybody?
Hello, Nancy Lush. How are you exchanging the care plan across the care team that are representing multiple healthcare systems?
So this is another thing that we're working on right now, and we're testing this out. It's rather than having everybody with their own copy of the same care plan, we have the care plan in one location, and we have one person who is the curator for that care plan, potentially the primary care physician. But all the members of the care team have access to that record. Those are things that we can generate through FHIR. We can set them up with, this is part of them agreeing to be part of the care team for that patient. When they respond back, we will set them up with not only access to the record, but also notifications via subscription so that they can get the information about what's going on with the patient. And as things change, they get the push out notifications. And ultimately, getting back to where we want to be in the very far future, we've also come up with this concept called the distributed care plan, so that individual pieces of the patient's record. You think about this, you have a primary care provider who's taking care of their patient's overall care, but they've been referred to a specialist. The specialist is not going to create a care plan on the primary care provider's system. But they will create theirs on theirs, but everybody that's part of that team needs to know what's going on. So we will have, and we've been working with a Perspecta on this, the idea of coming up with a viewer excuse me, that will pull all those pieces of the care plan together from all the different systems and represent the patient's total care record on one screen, even though it's assembled from pieces that have been pulled from multiple systems. Excuse me.
Hi, my name is Sanjeev Lal. I came a little late, so if you answered it, forgive me, in your speech or presentation earlier. How are you collecting different pieces of information from different providers, different EMRs, in that same one individual patient?
Mm-hmm. So to start with, and it's something that needs to be considered because that's a real world use case. It's outside the scope of what we've addressed to date with our project. What we're looking at right now is we have all the data that is available to the person who's creating the care plan. And so they have their problem list, they have their medication list. Now, there is an assumption, and it is a big assumption, that all of that information, if I have that patient that's been treated by specialists, for example, because I know where that system is and because I'm part of the care team for that patient along with that specialist, I have access to that information so I can reconcile their medication list, I can keep their problem list active or up to date and ready to go, so that when I do go to create that care plan, I've got all the information I need. Now, that is a big assumption, and it's one that we still need to test. Yes, sir.
I just want to make a quick comment about the distributed care plans. So blockchain would be an excellent technology to implement the distributed care plans.
It is definitely a possibility. It's outside the scope, again, of what we've been working on for now, but ultimately when we get there, that's something we're going to have to look at. Mr. Dagnall, yes, sir.
Hey, Jeff. Put in the mic. I'll be back. So, we've worked on it a little bit, so it's sort of a loaded question, I guess. But when you define these care plans, it sort of creates a community of providers and patients that all have to interact to solve some ongoing problem, right? Some shared process and workflow. Some of that's linear. That you want to do this stuff, and you want to order this thing, and you want to get this result, and you want to do this, and that, whatever. But a lot of it's non-linear, like the back and forth that occurs between providers, patient, communication, messaging, et cetera. So how do you take this perspective that you're working on and apply it to, or allow it to be used for these sort of non-linear discussions and interactions that may occur across a community of people that are all collaborating towards a complex problem?
That was a loaded question. And I'm not sure we have the answer yet. I mean, that's one of the things I'm hoping will come out of this. I mean, ultimately, it's a question of documentation. You know, if it's in the system and we have access to it, we have the tools that we can start to aggregate it and then make decisions based off of it. But if we've got things that are being done that aren't in the record, you know, or people are doing things on the side, it's just like any other clinical situation. You know, information we don't know is the information that's going to kill us. But again, it is something that we need to be aware of, and we have to figure out how to address it. Yes, ma'am.
Jeff, you mentioned that the applied operation couldn't be used in some instances. Can you talk a little bit about that?
So when we originally started working on this project, the assumption with plan definitions and activity definitions with the apply operation was that the record was already stored on the system that was running the apply operation. I could send a message in to the EHR or to the FHIR server and say, I would like you to apply this particular plan definition, but you could only reference it by its ID. You couldn't, just say, here is a plan definition that we want you to apply to the system. And that was the change that they've made to R4. So now we can just say, for plan definition, execute the apply operation, and here's the resource we want you to apply. Yes? Mm-hmm. So, if there are no other questions, I've been given the it's all time message. So thank you all for coming, and if they have any other questions later, I'm going to be here all week, so please don't hesitate to walk.